Today we're going somewhere that I have been looking forward since we started this series. Louisiana, and more specifically, New Orleans. If you've been following my channel or my stories, you know we've covered a lot of states. While most people never expect to find darkness in quiet, peaceful states, Louisiana makes no attempt to hide its own. Louisiana wears the darkness like jewelry. This is a state where voodoo is not a Halloween costume. It's a living spiritual tradition practiced by real people, where the above-ground tombs and the cemeteries aren't an architectural choice. They're a necessity because the ground is so saturated with water that the dead won't stay buried. Where slavery left wounds so deep and so specific that they are still visible in the walls of buildings that are still standing. I have 3 places for you tonight. And I'll be honest, this might be the darkest episode we've done so far. The LaLaurie Mansion, the House of Horrors on Royal Street. Before we start with our first story, I need you to understand something. What happened in the LaLaurie Mansion is not a legend. It is not folklore. It is not a ghost story that was passed down by generations. This story is a documented history, with court records you can find online. You will find the story on the newspaper with eyewitness testimonies. What Madame Delphine LaLaurie did to the people in her home is one of the most well-documented cases of human cruelty in American history. The building where she did it is still standing on the Royal Street in French Quarter. Delphine LaLaurie was one of the most prominent socialites in New Orleans in the early 1830s. Beautiful, charming, educated, and wealthy. She hosted elaborate dinner parties at her Royal Street mansion. People wanted to know her, and people wanted to be invited to her home. Delphine LaLaurie was a perfectly respectable, even admirable woman for her time and place. But there were rumors. Neighbors were noticing suspicious activity. An enslaved child was seen falling from the roof of the mansion. Some reports say she jumped to escape what was happening inside. Others say she was pushed. Authorities investigated the LaLaurie family and did not find anything or evidence of foreplay. But the enslaved people in their household were confiscated. But as quickly the slave people were taken, Madame LaLaurie quietly and behind the scenes bought them back. On April 10th, 1834, a fire broke out in the LaLaurie kitchen. When firefighters and neighbors arrived to help, they broke through a locked door to what they believed was the source of the fire. What they found in that room stopped them cold. Enslaved people, men and women, were chained to the walls. Some had been subjected to what appeared to be surgical procedures. Limbs had broken and reset at wrong angles. Bodies showed evidence of prolonged torture. Some of the people in that room had been there so long, they could barely move. The descriptions from the first responders who entered that room are so specific and so horrifying that even today, nearly 200 years later, they are difficult to read. Madame LaLaurie and her husband did not wait around to face justice. That night, they loaded a carriage and fled New Orleans. They are believed to have fled to France. Delphine LaLaurie was never arrested or charged. She died in Europe having faced no legal consequence for anything she did in that house. The LaLaurie Mansion has had many owners since 1834. A famous actor bought the house in 2007. During that time, he reported experiences in the house that he has described in interviews as genuinely disturbing, though he has been careful about the specifics. The activity reported throughout the mansion's history is remarkably consistent across owners and occupants who had no connection to each other. One of those experiences is people screaming. You can hear the screaming from the upper floors and from the area where the locked room was located. Multiple owners over the decades described hearing screaming in the night. When investigating, they would find nothing. But most of the time, these owners bought the house without knowing the dark history hidden in the walls. When visiting the building, witnesses describe seeing figures in chains, seeing people who appear to be in distress, moving through the rooms, not appearing to be aware of the current inhabitants. One occupant described seeing a woman, not Madame LaLaurie. The woman was standing in the hallway, looking directly at her, with an expression she described as not frightening but heartbreaking. It seemed like she was asking for something that nobody in that building had ever been able to give her. A paranormal team that investigated the mansion in 2015 spent 12 hours inside. They captured audio that contained multiple distinct voices in the upper floors. They also captured what appeared to be a human figure on thermal imaging in the area of the former locked room, a figure that was not any member of their team. The lead investigator felt grief, a persistent, lingering grief. It's a pain that never resolved because justice was never served. That infamous mansion on Royal Street hasn't moved. Go ahead, walk by and look up at the windows. But be careful. They say if you look closely enough, you might catch something in the darkness looking back. The Myrtles Plantation, 12 ghosts and a haunted mirror. All right, this story takes us out of the city and into the Louisiana countryside. In a town called St. Francisville, there's a plantation house that has been called one of the most haunted homes in America. Unlike a lot of places that earn that reputation through one dramatic event, the Myrtles earned it through layers. Layer after layer of tragedy, violence, and grief stacked on top of each other over 200 years. Before General David Bradford built the Myrtles Plantation in 1796, the land was a Tunica burial ground. During that era, it was common to build on sacred Native American land and burial sites. However, in many spiritual traditions, especially those in Louisiana, this is a serious offense. Building over the dead without permission, ceremony, or respect is believed to carry heavy spiritual consequences. The Myrtles family was cursed from the beginning. Its first owner, Bradford, died there, followed by generations of families who met sudden, violent, or unexplained ends. It's as if the house soaked up every tragedy that happened within its walls. The most famous spirit is Chloe, an enslaved woman whose story is legendary in American hauntings. After being caught eavesdropping on the Woodruff family, her ear was cut off as punishment. To hide the scar, she began wearing a green turban. Desperate to prove her worth, she allegedly baked a cake laced with toxic oleander, hoping to make the family sick and help them back to health. The plan backfired. The mother and 2 children died from the poison. Fearing the master's retaliation, the other enslaved workers took Chloe and hanged her, throwing her body into the river without a burial. Since then, she's never left. Witnesses consistently report seeing a woman in a green turban standing in the gardens or watching from the hallways. Never aggressive, just eternally present. Then there's the mirror. In Louisiana Creole tradition, mirrors must be covered when someone dies to prevent their soul from becoming trapped. When the Woodruffs died, the mirrors stayed uncovered. Today, visitors report seeing handprints pressing against the glass from the inside. People have also seen reflections of a woman and children who aren't actually in the room. In 2019, one guest fled before dawn after seeing 3 figures standing right behind her in the reflection of an empty hallway. But the Myrtles is crowded. Researchers believe at least 12 different spirits haunt the grounds, ranging from murder judge to unidentified figures who appear and vanish without warning. Today, the Myrtles is a bed and breakfast. You can spend the night if you're brave enough, but most people who do usually have a story to tell by breakfast. St. Louis Cemetery Number 1, the City of the Dead. Our final story today is about a place unlike anywhere else we visited. It's not a house, a bridge, or a road. It is a cemetery, but not the quiet, overgrown kind you might find in the woods. St. Louis Cemetery Number 1 in New Orleans is literally a city of the dead. It has a grid of streets and addresses, but the buildings are tombs, and the residents have been there for over 200 years. For some of them, life hasn't truly ended. Built in 1789, this is the oldest cemetery in New Orleans. New Orleans sits below sea level. The ground is soaked with water. In the early days, if people buried coffins underground, they would actually float back to the surface after a heavy rain. To solve this, people built tombstones. Huge tombstones which are crowded together, often holding many generations of the same family. When you walk these narrow lanes, you're walking through centuries of history, from the Civil War to the yellow fever outbreaks. The energy here is incredibly thick. The most famous person buried here is Marie Laveau. She was the Voodoo queen of New Orleans in the 1800s. She was a powerful healer and spiritual leader who was both loved and feared. Even though she died in 1881, people believe she is still working. Her tomb is covered in small X marks and gifts left by visitors asking for her help. Many people have reported strange things at her grave, like the stone feeling hot to the touch, a hand resting on their shoulder, or seeing a tall woman in a traditional head wrap who vanishes in an instant. One visitor in 2018 claimed that when she touched the tomb, she felt a bolt of energy and heard a clear voice in her head give her the exact advice she needed. Marie isn't the only spirit there. Tour guides, who know the grounds better than anyone, speak about the back lanes of the cemetery with deep respect. There are sections where the air feels heavy, like the stillness right before a lightning strike. Cameras often stop working, and entire groups of tourists will suddenly fall silent at the same time, as if everyone felt a ghost pass by. One guide says he's lost count of how many strangers have pointed into the same narrow alleyway, claiming they see figures standing between the tombs, just watching the living walk past. What makes St. Louis Cemetery special is that the living and the dead still talk to each other. In New Orleans, death isn't seen as a permanent goodbye. It's just a change. The dead are still part of the community. People don't go there just to be scared. They go to ask for guidance or to say thank you. You can visit the cemetery, and if you stand at Marie Laveau's tomb and touch the stone, you might feel nothing at all. But many people walk out of those gates feeling much lighter than when they walked in. We've looked at 3 different places in one state, and it's clear that Louisiana is one of the most spiritually intense locations we've ever covered. First, there is the LaLaurie Mansion. It is the site of some of the worst documented cruelty in American history. The people who suffered there never saw justice, and the building has carried the weight of those events for almost 200 years. Then, there is the Myrtles Plantation. This is where Chloe, a woman who was killed and never given a proper burial, is still seen walking the porch in her green turban. It's also where the spirits of 2 children are said to press their hands against a mirror from the inside. Finally, we visited St. Louis Cemetery Number 1. In this city of the dead, the line between our world and the next is very thin. Marie Laveau still receives visitors today, and many people feel a strange presence in the narrow paths between the ancient tombs. I've said before that Louisiana wears its dark history like jewelry, and I believe that's true. But it is important to remember that this darkness comes from real, historical injustice. If you enjoyed these hauntings, hit that like button and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe as we continue our journey across the country, uncovering the 3 most haunted locations in every single state. You won't want to miss where we head next. If you ever visit New Orleans, go see these places for yourself. Walk the streets and visit the cemetery. And if you stop by the Voodoo Queen's tomb, you might want to leave an offering, as she might be listening.